Welcome everybody. We're thrilled to have you here for today's webinar, and we also include a live demonstration on torque testing of child-resistant closures, focusing on achieving FDA 21 CFR Part 11 compliance. But before we dive in, there are a couple of housekeeping things I'd like to share with you. Today's session is brought to you by McMesson, proud member of the Physical Properties Testers Group. PPT Group is a collective of leading brands in the field of physical properties testing, offering a wide array of solutions for testing tensile and compressive strength, torque, textiles, and the effects of shock and vibration, among other parameters. Our sister companies within the PPT family include Landsman, James Hill and Allures. For more information and details about the group, please visit the PPT site. We will also share a link of the events page in the chat box for your convenience. But just focusing on McMesson, we have established technology labs in the US, UK, and Asia, dedicated to supporting our customers with education, proof of concept, and demonstration testing. So should you have any specific needs in physical properties testing, our global team is at your disposal to provide the assistance that you might need. Let me introduce the team for today's webinar. Moses DeRoja will again be our presenter, and I'm Sharon, one of the coordinators. Additionally, we have support staff across Asia, Europe, and the Americas. We're aiming for a dynamic and engaging webinar, therefore we encourage your participation through questions. Feel free to submit any queries that you have at any point during the webinar using the question box. We will address these questions during the Q&A session at the end. As always, the webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a recording to the email that you've registered with. And it won't take long. It should be within a day or so. And then I know previously people have asked on the webinar how they can make the screens bigger and smaller. If in the event that Moses is sharing the presentation as well as his webcam where he's demonstrating a torque test in progress, there are you will see three small lines just below the webcam window, and if you just hover your mouse over it, you can pull that up or down, and that will either make the top window bigger or smaller. So that's within your control and something that you can control. But hopefully you've been with us for a few webinars and figured that out, but if not, try it today. And without further ado, I'll hand it over to Moses.
Thanks, Sharon, and thanks everybody for making the time to join our webinar today. This has been a series we started several weeks ago with a general overview of the McMesson solutions as far as medical device testing is concerned. A few weeks ago, we did the needle sharpness and syringe actuation, or the break, loose, and glide testing. The next logical step was to address another relatively busy part of what we offer in the medical device and packaging industries, which is child-resistant closure torque testing. So hopefully there'll be additional webinars in this series as we cover that entire topic. So again, topic for today is going to be torque testing of child-resistant closures with a little bit of emphasis on how our current testing software is compliant to 21 CFR Part 11. I have to throw in a couple of caveats at the very beginning. As the delivery gods would have it, the ideal test that we would have used for this webinar did not make it as far as delivery. We did not receive it in time. Because the software that drives that test is essentially the software that is indeed 21 CFR Part 11 compliance. However, the tester design, footprint, form factor is all very similar to the test that we will be using today, more as a proof of concept, and then we'll take a closer look at what a typical test would look like in the compliant software. So bear with us. Nothing's really going to change as far as the mechanics and all of the different steps that go into preparing a test for CRC testing and so on. Again, if at a later date any of you require a more one-on-one demo, if you want to send products in and so on, with the Vortex Pro or the Helixa Pro, we'll be happy to accommodate that as well. That way, you're not left in the dark. But rest assured, you'll still walk away with quite a bit of information today. So, all right, without further ado, quick primer. I know every time we talking about the medical device and pharmaceutical industries, when you throw the term testing around, it kind of confuses people a little bit. So I'd like to clarify at the very onset here is that the term testing in the context of physical properties testing refers in this case to torque testing. In other cases, it might be compressive testing, tensile testing, and so on. In this case, it's going to be the release or removal torque of actual child-resistant closure caps. Medical device testing is not a chemical or biological test. It's not intended to diagnose or cure any medical conditions. It's just essentially a non-medical testing of the physical properties of medical devices. So when we're using testing in that broad term today, that's essentially what we'll be referring to, so there's no confusion. All right, so our agenda today is very simple. Usually the live demonstration helps answer a lot of the questions that you might have had in the actual presentation. So we'll look initially at the importance of medical device testing in general, and then we'll look a closer look at the introduction. We'll introduce the child-resistant closure testing, take a closer look at some of the types of CRC caps, and then the common push and turn caps that you usually encounter. And as promised, we will also offer live demonstration where we'll actually run a couple of tests here just to show you what that looks like. Then we'll come back and look at our 21 CFR Part 11 compliance as far as our flagship Vector Pro MT software is concerned. And then we'll open the floor to any questions, suggestions, commissions, omissions that you all might have. So again, first thing we'll look at is why medical device testing is important. So we've isolated 4 general areas. One is R&D, research and development, which allows producers and researchers, scientists to determine the product viability, strengths and weaknesses of the product. We also looked at quality control, which allows you all to establish product standards for quality and safety. When those standards are established, all future manufacturing or production is done against those set standards to determine if products are passing or failing or whether they're ready for market or not. And then in production, once those standards are set, maintaining the product quality and safety standards is critical to not just the relationship with the consumer and product loyalty, but also the viability of the product. And then finally, supplier audit. In a global economy, sometimes you may outsource part of your production to third parties. They'll come back and tell you, yep, we tested these and these are the values we're getting. By actually running your own supplier audit tests, you're able to measure if those values or you've received from your suppliers actually meet the standards or the paperwork that's been provided with them. We do see that quite a bit of that in our industry. Great. So again, I know when we throw around the term CRC testing, sounds generic. What role does it really play? If you don't really understand it, it just sounds like a typical term that we throw around. Oh, it's just push and turn. Not necessarily. We look at it in terms of first product quality and then secondarily product safety. Now, both of these are equally important. Sometimes the safety part is even more important. So sometimes it's not just a matter of convenience where when you go to open your CRC cap, it just comes apart and spills the product. It could be bleach, it could be petroleum additive, it could be pretty much anything. And so The issues we're looking for are whether or not the product is under torqued, whether it's over torqued, where grandma just can't get into her prescribed medication or her prescriptions, or the ideal torque, which not only allows the person for whom that medication is prescribed to get into the cap, but also prevents children from accessing dangerous chemicals or dangerous medications that are not intended for their consumption. So for us, most physical properties testing is going to be a Goldilocks test. It's a too little, too much, and just right. So the ideal torque value in CRC testing does not only involve the maximum release torque required to uncap the product, but also the maximum axial or push force required to disengage or unlock the locking mechanism that is required to uncap the container. So again, you can either look at it as a major inconvenience, a matter of product quality, or you can look at it as a matter of safety, and with it, all the cascading liability issues. When your brand's reputation is on the line, failure is not an option. You want to make sure it's doing exactly what you need it to do, that in an emergency, the patient for whom the medication has been prescribed can get into it, but then if it's just left laying around, you can also be rest assured that a child cannot easily get into dangerous medication, which could create all kinds of problems. So if you ever had to think of the role that CRC testing plays in our life, you could at least look at these two here. So what is child-resistant closure, or CRC testing? We'll take the key word in that definition there, the child. So as the name denotes, child-resistant closures are container caps designed to prevent children from opening toxic chemicals or pharmaceutical products. The cap designs come in many different forms, most notable among which is the push and turn. Newer designs these days include the squeeze and twist or turn, as well as the push or pull tab and turn. But again, as our kids are getting smarter and smarter, if you're a parent, we're also coming up with different designs that are making it even harder for children to access dangerous chemicals or pharmaceuticals while still maintaining a certain level of ease for, say, older patients to get into their prescriptions and so on. So a CRC test is essentially just a torque test. It's a release torque test that seeks to measure not only the torque required to open the cap, but also, as we mentioned, the amount of force that is required to deactivate the locking mechanism. Now, in the past, the test standard actually calls for you to just, bring in about 80 kids into your facility and just hand them these products and see whether or not they can open them. As you can imagine, whether the kids have been fed lunch or not, they could be cranky, and you probably would not get reliable data you could use. So in physical properties testing, we've decided to come up with a procedure that allows us to establish a more consistent and repeatable testing environment, where each operator is going to do the exact same thing the exact same way. So when the products are conforming or not, we'll be able to catch them before they get to the consumer. Now, there's several industries that use CRC caps in the pharmaceutical, medical device, bottling and capping, the chemical, petroleum industries. There might be more that I've left out, but these are the major ones that use the child-resistant closure. And again, the question here is a little above the quality. We're looking more at product safety for children. We did mention briefly the types of CRC caps. You have the push and turn, and then you may have seen the common push tab and turn, and then lately you can see the squeeze and turn. There are other more creative ones that I've personally encountered, but this webinar will focus on the push and turn, because that essentially forms a majority of the CRC closure caps that are out there. All right, so how are these caps tested? For push and turn or CRC caps, the test will measure, as we mentioned, the ideal axial push force. Now, this is sometimes a little tricky. In a perfect world, you'd have a tester that comes down and applies a specific force while also performing a torque test. At some point, McMesson will probably come up with something like that. It's been a dream of mine for the last almost 20 years. So, but in the absence of such an automated system, what we use is certified mass or calibrated weights to apply that axial force, which essentially simulates what your push and turn your push force is, and then obviously the torque tester will do its own thing. So we're measuring the axial force, which technically is a known force. After you've tried several different masses, you'll come up with ones that allow you to consistently open the cap. And the reason for identifying that the ideal load is that way when there are outliers or products that are failing under if all circumstances and all the testing environment is the same and nothing's changed, you'll be able to identify the products that are failing, whether it's the threads on the container, or whether it's the locking mechanism itself that has a problem, or whether the capper is putting too much torque, and so on. So establishing the ideal testing standards is critical, which usually starts with identifying the ideal push force or axial load that mimics that push force. So now the ideal testing equipment will include a torque tester. Now this could be manual, this could be automated. Again, for purposes of repeatability, you do want something that eliminates operator error as much as possible, which means software-driven testers are usually the best option, or the preferred method. Once you program a test, all the operator has to do is put a sample in and hit the start button. It removes all the guesswork out of the process and allows the tester to do its own thing. It's going to run at the same speed, whether it's 10 revolutions per minute, 5 revolutions per minute. It's going to run to the same angle. You're using the same axial load, and that way we're able to generate repeatable results in a more consistent testing environment. The next thing you'll look at is a capping chuck. Now, these will come in all different types. Again, what I'm currently displaying here, these are machined chucks that kind of fit the serrated caps on most of these caps. There are instances where we might need a split mandrel or a silicone layer mandrels that allow you to grab samples that are glass or plastic or aluminum that are not serrated and are smooth, in order to maintain a certain level of friction to prevent the samples from sliding as they're being tested. And then finally, obviously, the certified mass, which mimics that axial force or the push force while you run that test. So these are the different components that you usually would find in a CRC testing application. So I'm going to jump into the live demo here, as I mentioned, as a precursor. We'll run these tests just so you can physically see what that proof of that concept, everything we've just previously discussed, are, by kind of taking a look at the different components here that we're using. And then we'll come back and take a look at how our new software in combination with our new torque testers are actually compliant with CFR 21 CFR Part 11. So at this point, I am going to share my webcam. Excellent. So I'll also stop sharing my screen so you can have a better view of that screen. So what we're using here is essentially, let me bring my webcam a little closer. So I did mention the machined chuck, and that's essentially what's attached to the sensor. This is the torque sensor. This is the machine chuck that actually fits the cap. I'm just going to lift this so you see what that looks like. So that's the cap we'll be testing today. This is a typical push and turn cap. And once the machined chuck has the teeth that are serrated, and so they kind of mate with the actual cap. One of the reasons this is a preferred method is that way we're not relying on operators to guess how tight they're actually tightening on the caps and so on. All operators are going to do the exact same thing, the exact same way each time. And then on the base, obviously, we have several different options for the base, but the key is to prevent the base from slipping or sliding as we're applying torque. So whatever torque is being applied is being measured by that torque sensor. And then at the very top, we're using a 2 kilogram certified mass as to mimic the axial force. Now there's several different, depending on the type of product you're testing. Some require more, some require less. we've determined that this is the axial force or the top load that's required to consistently open these caps. And having set that standard, now if we just randomly picked a handful of samples and put them in the tester and run the test, and we found out that they're not opening, then we could now go back to the drawing board and determine where the problem is, whether the capper is applying too much application torque, or if there are any issues with the threads, or that the lock-in mechanism is faulty, whatever the case may be. But again, if you maintain a certain level of consistency in the components, when there are issues, you can kind of retrace your steps to try to figure out what the problems are. So without further ado, I am going to run a test here, and let's see. So all we're doing in this test is just running to 360 degrees. And if you look closely, you should see, as with most release torque applications, you should see that cap rise as the cap actually opens. So let's go. Excellent. So that's the whole test. I know it's kind of anticlimactic, but that's the whole test. In a typical testing environment, at this point, we'll look at what the testing program is, what the test result is, and then depending on whether or not you have set your pass or fail criteria, you can immediately tell whether or not the test is passing or failing. What I'm going to do here, bear with me, is just return home, which essentially reapplies the torque. Then I'm going to run another one just so you kind of get an idea of what that looks like. So I'm using a totally different simulated software here to run the test. As I mentioned, the focus is going to be on our 21 CFR compliant software, but unfortunately the compliant testers are not here, and that's the reason that we're running this way, just to show you what the test looks like. Most importantly, the components that go into a test. Now, these will also be true with the new Vortex Pro and the Helixa Pro. It's going to have its sensor, it's going to have that base fixture that grips the bottle, it's going to have a machined chuck or a layered chuck or a split mandrel that grips the cap. And all of these components will pretty much be very similar or the same in the new software configuration. So let's run another one. Once again, as you can see, the cap is rising, and if you want to check at the end of the test to make sure that it is really open, you can technically just lift, and as you can see, it has removed the cap. So this, again, if it did not come up, if you had a batch of 20 tests and 18 of them are opening every single time with that known axial force and running to that same angle, yeah, you know you're on your way to establishing a consistent and repeatable testing environment. If only 2 are passing, then you know you have a problem. So I always look at the 80 and the 20%, get one way or the other. So this is what the actual test looks like. As I mentioned, if somewhere down the line in the next few weeks when we do have the equipment in stock, if any of you would like a one-on-one demo on what that looks like on the newer testers, please feel free to reach out, and we'll be happy to arrange for you to see a live demo of that as well. So I'm going to go back to our presentation here. Okay, and take a look at the testers that we have just mentioned. So in ensuring data integrity in FDA regulated industries, we've again established our software engineers have been amazing in establishing 21 CFR Part 11 compliance for our Vector Pro MT software. Now, our compliant torque testing systems that are compliant with the new software, compatible with the new software, is the Vortex Pro and the Helixa Pro. I've provided 2 QR codes if you wanted to access, just use your phone to access the product pages to see all the different specifications, the key features and so on, or to download the data sheets for either of these 2 products, you could do so. I'll leave that running here while I talk through them. The Vortex Pro is going to be very similar to the system we just used in this demonstration. Again, it accommodates different containers, different size containers, larger containers, and so on, up to, with torque requirements up to about 90 inch-pounds of torque. And we've seen our fixtures accommodate anywhere from, say, a lipstick size all the way up to a gallon size container. Again, it's going to be either, what you're looking at there is the touch version, which comes as an all-in-one unit with a tablet PC attached to it that runs the software, or you could have a laptop or all-in-one PC, or just a simple PC version where the software is running off of any of those Windows-based systems. So again, the difference between the Helixa Pro and the Vortex Pros, the Helixa Pro is more of a precision torque system. They pretty much perform very similar functions. However, for torque applications that require very minimal torque or requires a little bit more precision, that's not to say that the Vortex has that precision testing instrument. It is. But the Helixa has a more robust crosshead that allows for XY adjustment, and also has really minimal torque load cells or sensors that allow you to test in very low torque environments. So these are the two that are available now. The Helixa Pro, in the past, our Helixa systems have been used for ISO 80369, which is the lure lock testing, because of the precision of the crosshead. So again, that may not be a CRC testing, but it's also just absolutely fabulous for that particular test. And the reason for it is the same principle that allows us to apply that axial load at the top is what also allows us to apply the 20 Newton load in that ISO 80369 lure lock test. So these are the two testers. As I said, if you'd like to get a little bit more information, you can scan the QR codes to access the product pages for one or both. And as far as the Vector Pro software that drives both of these systems, the first thing that you'd notice, again, the statute 21 CFR Part 11 mostly calls for recording or having a reliable audit trail of any records for data integrity purposes, any records that are created, modified, or deleted. Beyond that, our software looks at a whole lot more, where it records almost every action that any user takes in the testing environment. So again, our audit trail is a comprehensive event log, which automatically records all actions and changes throughout the entire testing process. The versioning allows all test changes that are saved to be modified. When they're modified from the original form, they're saved as different versions. So for instance, when you create a version 1 of a test running at a different speed of, say, 10 revolutions per minute, and you decide that speed is too fast or too slow, and you make a modification, you can essentially create a version 2 of the test with a different speed. So when test results are being batched, you can have a batch of test results that are tested with one version of the test with a higher speed or lower speed, and another version of the test, the batch of results tested with a different version with a higher speed or lower speed, depending on whatever your changes are. And then there are also electronic signatures, with approvals feature, which replaces the need for manual or hard copy signatures. The next is user access. There are permissions that can be configured directly within Vector Pro, or in using an existing Microsoft Active Directory to kind of blend the user access control permission system within the Windows environment and our software as well. There are password options that allow you to determine the complexity of passwords, whether how passwords are reset, password aging, idle logout, how many attempts at guessing the wrong combination of username and password before a user is locked out. And when they're locked out, are they able to reset their own password, or do they require an administrator? So those are all different policies that can be set in the software. And then, as we mentioned, there's also the Active Directory, where the software can be operated locally or via a company network. Software security can then be integrated into a company's domain, and a common IT policy is set for all users. So whatever permissions they have on their systems will pretty much transfer to the permissions they have in the software as well. By default, Data is stored in a local database on a PC when you install the software on a local machine. For enhanced security, there is an option to install Microsoft SQL Server 2019 Express. This is available to purchase as an add-on module to have a more robust database for the testing software. This is a QR code to download the data sheet for the testing software. I am going to switch over to the testing software now to kind of walk you through how you would go about configuring a test for torque, and then configuring looking at what the how you configure the test results or the calculations, and then look at some of the features that we have mentioned here in real time and what they actually look like in the testing software. So let's go back here. All right. So if you can still see my screen, this is essentially what the testing software looks like when a user first logs in. We'll start in the permissions tab. So in the permissions tab, I did mention this is where you go to turn on your policies for password complexity, how many total characters, how many number of uppercase characters are used, how many lowercase, how many numbers, how many non-alphanumeric. And so to create a harder to guess password, you can set all the different policies here for password complexity. And then also the statute calls for password aging. So you can, as an administrator, you can set when those passwords expire by turning that on and determining whether all passwords expire in 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 85 days, whatever the case may be. And then again, if a user enters a wrong combination of username and or password, how many chances do they have before they're locked out of the system, and can at that point either reset their own password or reach out to an administrator to have their passwords reset. And both of those are options in the software. And then there is obviously the idle logout. So imagine if data integrity is critical. If you've just tested a batch of 50 samples, but you got to go out to lunch, if you leave the computer sitting there, any user can access the computer and modify the data or do anything with your login while you're still logged in with your session. So the system is able to log out users if there's whatever time you've set in that policy. If there's at least 5 minutes of inactivity, that will log the user out up to however many. So the way the system recognizes this, if there isn't an active test running, or your mouse is not, the cursor is not moving across the screen, or you're not configuring a test, or there's just simply no activity in the software, it will lock that user out to preserve data integrity. So that's what that is. These are the options for Active Directory and SQL Server that we have previously talked about. The full screen login essentially gives you a kiosk mode that kind of completely takes over the screen and prevents users from getting into the Windows environment, so on. So users and groups, you're able to set up users and or groups. So the way these work is when you go into assign permissions, you can set up individual users or you can set up groups. First, obviously, you want to set up these users, and then you can assign them to groups, and which allows them to access different sides of the software that they have permissions to access. So again, they can be morning shift, night shift managers, QC managers, whatever the case may be. Setting up a user is as simple as assigning a username and a password. Again, depending on the password complexity set in the policies, that has to be compliant with that policy. And then whether or not you want that user to be able to email themselves a password in case they lock themselves out, this is where the administrator will either turn that on or just leave those off and just enter the username and password. So that when you set up users, the next thing is either just leave that alone, or you can create also groups and then just drag and drop those users into those groups. Right, so in the next tab, when you go to assign permissions as to who has access to all the tests, who has access to the attributes, who can copy an existing test and create another test, who has access to deleting a test, who can even access the audit trail or the event log, you can drag and drop either individual users or total groups. So as you drag and drop these groups, they now have access, the permissions to access those parts of the test. Whichever users are in that group now have the ability to access those parts of the software and so on. So that's how our permissioning system works in the software. Just gonna backspace here. All right, next thing is the events. So this is the event log that I just previously mentioned that pretty much tracks everything a user does in the system. Again, as an administrator logged in, as you can see here, everything I just did by dragging and dropping any of those users and or groups into the different permissions has been logged. And you can query either the database, you can query the results by date, by user, by action, and so on to see, anything that anyone has done in the system, and then you can send that out to a CSV file, or you can email the results to any number of email addresses separated by commas, or you can simply print to a network or local printer. All right, so setting up a test is very simple. If you go into new test, obviously you're going to use either the Vortex Pro or Helixa Pro. I'm going to give this, call this webinar CRC. That's our test name, webinar, and click OK. Again, so what the next screen requires is what's that initial direction of movement? Is it moving clockwise? Is it moving counterclockwise? So let's say if we wanted to simulate what a capper is doing on the line, so we'd like to apply application torque, obviously that's clockwise. If we want to apply release torque, it's going to be counterclockwise. And we'll select that. And most of our test applications are going to be torque versus angle. And then click OK. That brings us into our attributes. If you have serial numbers, batch IDs, operator IDs that users are required to either enter for the entire batch or enter per sample, you can drag and drop those into attributes. So I'll just call this serial number. And all right, so as you can see, that attribute is now added. So by leaving it at none, you can enter just one serial number for all the samples you're testing, or you can prompt for value either before or after the test. So before each test, it's going to prompt the operator to enter a particular serial number for a particular product, and that will be associated with the test result once the test completes. The next tab is where all the action happens. We'll start on the right side. Again, we'll select our sampling rate, which is how much data we're acquiring in the test, and it's going to be anywhere from 1 sample per second up to 1,000 hertz, 1,000 samples per second. As a rule of thumb, anything between 100 and 500 should be plenty of data. And then our preferred units of measurement for time, torque, and angle. So again, if you want to rather test in inch pounds, you could. If you want to test in inch ounces, you could. Newton centimeters, you could. For purposes of our webinar here, we'll just select Newton meters. And then your angles are going to be either in revolutions or degrees. So, and then obviously your speed is going to be degrees per minute or revolutions per minute, which is the preferred. Once these are set, if you come over to the left side, you can now enter your common commands. This is super simple. So at the beginning of the test, if you have any residual angle or residual torque on the sensor, you obviously want to tear both values out before the test begins. So you have either 0. Most of these icons that represent the commands in the system will also have the little tooltip there that indicates exactly what they represent. So if you click on that, as you see, this says tears the torque value. So you can either drag the tear torque value, tear angle, or you can just drag a tear all values and just drag and drop that into your timeline. So each time you put a sample in, hit start, first thing that's going to happen is it's going to tear out both values. Next thing we're going to do is go into target. So again, are we running to a specific angle? Are we running to a specific torque? Are we cycling between two torque values? Are we cycling between two torque angles? We're going to go with run to an angle. We previously did. So again, most of these commands will also have additional parameters that need to be entered. So great, we'd rather run to an angle, but at what speed and what angle are we running to? So if you just hover above the command and just click on it, it will allow you to say, okay, we're going to run to 360 degrees and we're going to run at say 10 revolutions per minute. If you're expecting the sample to possibly fail, you can also leave that break detection on. So if it crosses the thread, it will immediately stop the test, whether it's made it to that target angle or not. If you're not expecting that, you can just turn that off. So that's all there is to the test. Zero all values, run to 360 degrees. So one of the other attributes, I'm going to go back and add the attributes here and say test notes. So let me put another label, and we'll call this axial load. And if you have different samples that require different axial forces, once again, you can prompt the operator for the value, 10 pounds, 20 pounds, 2 kilograms, 3 kilograms for each one, or you can just do as we have here in our demo. We're going to use a 2 kilogram mass. And that's essentially going to be displayed in our test results. So anybody looking at it will be able to tell exactly what we used for axial force. So that is our operations. The final part is the test result, which is what we're looking for in the test. So again, we'll start with the attributes. We'll go with axial load. We do want to include that in our results. And then in our standard results, we are looking for the maximum release torque, which we're going to call just removal torque, release torque. You can now, on that screen, you can also assign pass or fail criteria. So for instance, if you only want to meet a certain minimum minimum threshold, say, you know what, as long as we meet, say, 10 Newton meters of torque, we're happy. Anything above that is perfect. Or we do not want to exceed 20 Newton meters of torque because that would be too much for anybody to open, right? Or you can simply enable both and just create a range, which means any result that falls between 10 and 20 will have that check mark as a pass. Any result that either falls below your minimum or goes above the maximum will have the red X as a failed sample. If you're not sure, you can leave these off until you have actual data, then you kind of have an idea of what you're looking at as far as your pass or fail criteria. So that's our test result. If there's any other data that you're looking for, you could. There's several different calculations here. For purposes of our webinar, I'll just select this particular one. And then report templates. Generally, you do want to create a report for your batch of tests. Let's say, hey, morning shift tested 20 samples. Here's the report of everything they tested. So anybody looking at that report can tell how the products are doing coming off the line and so on. So again, there's several different templates and how they look. My personal favorite, template number 11, because it captures most of the data you're looking for. You can give it a name. You can upload your logo. If you're testing for a particular customer, you can upload their logo as well. You can give it a unique report name. Call this webinar CRC test report. All right, and then you'll have your actual data depending on however many results you've tested, and then exactly what those curves look like. Again, you'll have your torque versus angle, and that's essentially what we selected at the beginning. So that is the report template we will select. And once the test is configured, let me go back to the attributes, and I'm going to add a sample image of the actual sample we're testing now. When you include that attribute, it allows you to either use your webcam to take a picture of the sample, or you can just browse for an existing system. Again, for purposes of our demo, I'll just select something super simple like that one. All right, and then exit. So this will ask if you wish to save. We'll say yes. And just like that, that is our test. So for all intents and purposes, when a user logs in all they have to do is click on that little icon. Right now, if I do, it's probably going to throw an error because I'm not connected to either one of those two testers, the Vortex Pro or the Helixa Pro, but that's all there is to the test. Everything else is going to be done in the system, and you'll still have access to all the different 21 CFR Part 11 compliant portions of the testing software. So this is essentially what the software looks like. And as you can see, the software is compatible with all types of different testing applications in tension and compression, whether it's peel and adhesion, coefficient of friction, or the food texture testing, force testing for top load, so many different. As you can see, our previous webinar, we had the needle sharpness on elastomer caps and on simulated skin, break, loose, and glide. All kinds of different applications can be simulated here as long as you have the appropriate tester. So I am going to go back to our presentation here. Bear with me just a second. And I am going to turn it over to my colleague Sharon at this point for any questions.
Thanks very much, Moses. So just as everybody's collecting their thoughts, this is the time now for you to put down to put your question in the chat box if you have a question, and Moses can try and answer it for you. Moses, we already have one question,
Okay.
and so I'll start with that.
Okay.
The person says we currently have a multi-test 2.5 DVU. Could this be modified or adjusted with available, I think something went missing there, but available to order fixtures from McMesson to be able to run this type of testing as opposed to the equipment you have used?
Unfortunately, no, because your 2.5 DVU was designed specifically for force and materials testing, so compression and tension tests only, no torque at all. Even though it uses the same software to configure testing applications, whether they're ASTM test standards or ISO test standards, it's not currently designed to do any torque at all. However, if you purchased a Vortex Pro or Helixa Pro, again, you'd be using the same software to configure your torque testing applications. But your current DVU, no, it does not perform any torque testing applications at all.
Thanks, Moses.
Right, sure.
There's another question. This person wants to know, is it true the higher the axial load, the higher the torque off when I use the same torque on?
That is a tricky question because, again, in most of these physical testing applications, what you're trying to do is simulate what humans would do in a real life situation. So we're trying to simulate exactly how much force you're applying when you push down and then when you turn, right? Even the speed at which you turn is something that was simulated. We're guessing is going to be anywhere between 2 revolutions per minute to 5 revolutions per minute. If you have calibrated forearms, probably 10 revolutions per minute. But again, the key is to simulate something that's as realistic as possible. One of the things we have noticed about applying too much axial forces, the reason your torque is spiking is because you're applying too much force and creating extra friction that is not necessary for the application. So besides the locking mechanism itself holding its own and doing what it's supposed to do, when you apply that much axial force, you're crushing the cap against the threads, and that it introduces additional torque that might spike your actual values, though they do not necessarily represent what your true torque values are. And I admit, in such a testing environment, such a testing application, it might take a little bit of guesswork or trial and error to finally arrive at a load that gives you the most consistent results. Because one of the things we have noticed with some of these containers is if the torque is too little, it's not going to open at all. If it's too much, is you just get a continuous click while the mechanism stays activated, even though you'll see a bunch of spikes on traces on your graph that represent really higher torque. So sometimes less is more, but in my estimation, most axial load is going to be between 5 and 10 pounds. Anything above that, again, unless it's, let's say, bleach or something that requires real high. Now, I've also encountered products that have been disappointed with, because no matter how hard I pushed down, I still couldn't get it to disengage. And again, those are companies that probably require proper testing before they put their products out. But a higher axial load will likely yield a higher torque, but it does not necessarily mean that's the amount of torque resistance required to release the cap. It just means that you are introducing too much torque into the equation. Okay, back to you, Sharon.
Thanks so much, Moses. That's all the questions that we currently have. But if anybody has any further questions, or somebody listens to the on-demand recording later on and have questions, please do send it to either Moses, whose email address is on the screen at the moment, or to info@mcmesson.com, and we will assist you. But thank you very much for joining today. We appreciate it, and we hope to see you on one of our next webinars. We should be releasing our upcoming webinars shortly.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much, people. I'm going to end the webinar. Thank you.